Evelyn Harper thought she knew everything about her children, till the morning she woke up to find her teenage son, Dylan, lifeless on his bedroom floor. What began as a quiet suburban morning would unravel into one of the most disturbing family crimes the town had ever seen. Evelyn Harper thought she knew everything about her children, till the morning she woke up to find her teenage son, Dylan, lifeless on his bedroom floor. What began as a quiet suburban morning would unravel into one of the most disturbing family crimes the town had ever seen. The Harper home sat on a peaceful cul-de-sac in the kind of neighborhood where everyone smiled at each other, where kids rode their bikes until sunset, and where nothing bad ever seemed to happen. That illusion shattered forever on a warm spring morning when Evelyn woke up just before dawn. At first, she didn't know what had disturbed her sleep. It wasn't the alarm clock. It wasn't the chirping of birds outside. It was something else, a faint noise, almost like something had fallen in the next room. She rolled onto her side and looked at the clock. 5:17 a.m., too early for either of her kids to be up. Evelyn's heart began to race, a strange unease crawling through her. She tried to brush it off as nerves, maybe even a dream. But as she lay there, the silence in the house felt unnatural, the kind of silence that presses against your ears until you have to move just to break it. She got out of bed, pulling her robe tighter around her as she padded quietly down the hall. The air felt heavy. Even the hum of the refrigerator downstairs seemed distant, muffled. Something wasn't right. Have you ever had that feeling? That inexplicable sense that something bad is about to happen? If you have, drop a comment below, because that's exactly the feeling Evelyn couldn't shake as she reached the end of the hallway. The door to her son's room was slightly open. A thin strip of light glowed from inside, flickering like a candle. Evelyn hesitated. Dylan rarely left his lamp on. He was 17, independent, and always careful about little things. She gently pushed the door open with one hand. The hinges gave a faint squeak, and the sight that met her eyes made her stop cold. The room was a mess, drawers open, clothes scattered, a chair tipped over near the desk. The small lamp beside the bed lay on its side, the bulb still glowing weakly. There was something wrong with the smell too. Metallic, sharp. It hit her nose before her. Mind could even register what it meant. She stepped inside slowly, her breath quickening with each step. The carpet felt uneven beneath her bare feet. When she looked down, she saw shards of glass from a broken picture frame glinting under the light. It was the family photo Dylan had kept by his bed. The glass was cracked straight through her son's face in the picture. Evelyn bent to pick it up, but her hands were trembling so hard she couldn't grip it. For a moment, her mind refused to process what her eyes were seeing. There, on the floor, beside the bed, was Dylan. His body was twisted slightly, his arm reaching out as if he'd been trying to grab something. His eyes were open, blank and lifeless, staring up at the ceiling. Evelyn let out a sound that didn't even sound human. It was a raw, choking cry that tore from deep in her chest. She dropped to her knees beside him, shaking him, begging him to wake up even as the truth began to crash over her. She could feel how cold his skin was. She could see the marks around his neck, dark, brutal, unmistakable. If you were in her place, what would you do? Would you freeze, or would you scream for help? Tell us in the comments, because at that moment, Evelyn's instincts took over. She stumbled to her feet and ran to the phone on the kitchen counter, her hands slipping as she tried to dial 911. Her voice broke as she told the dispatcher what had happened, but the words barely made sense even to her. A few minutes later, she could already hear sirens in the distance, growing louder. She stood outside on the porch in her robe, the early morning sun just beginning to rise, casting soft light over the street. Neighbors peeked out from behind their curtains, confused. When the police arrived, Evelyn led them through the front door, her voice shaking as she explained everything she'd seen. Officers moved quickly, taping off the room, checking doors and windows. They asked her to sit down, to breathe, but she couldn't stop shaking. Every sound, the click of cameras, the murmur of voices felt far away, like she was underwater. Upstairs, Dylan's room was now a crime scene. The detective glanced at Evelyn from the doorway, his expression unreadable. Something about the scene didn't make sense, but he didn't say it out loud. Not yet, before we go any further. If you're the kind of person who needs to know the truth behind every mystery, make sure you subscribe. Because what happened in that quiet house on Maplewood Lane was far more complicated than anyone could have imagined. And as the investigation began, one thing was certain. This was no accident. The next few hours passed in a blur. Police cars lined the quiet street, their flashing lights cutting through the early morning calm. Neighbors stood outside in their robes, whispering, trying to piece together what had happened inside the Harper house. Evelyn sat on the edge of the couch, wrapped in a blanket one of the officers had given her. She stared blankly at the family photos on the wall pictures, from birthdays, vacations, ordinary moments that now felt like they belonged to another life. Detectives moved quietly in and out of Dylan's room, gathering evidence. The medical examiner had already confirmed what Evelyn feared most. Dylan's death wasn't natural. The marks on his neck were clear. It was deliberate. Someone had strangled him, but who? The house had been locked from the inside, and nothing valuable was missing. The windows were shut, except for Dylan's. It was open just a few inches. The screen still perfectly in place. Detective Ryan Cole, who led the investigation, was known for noticing what others missed. He paced the room slowly, scanning the details, the broken lamp, the scattered clothes, the fallen chair. "There's no sign of forced entry," one officer reported. Ryan nodded, his eyes narrowing on the window. He didn't buy the idea that someone climbed in. The scene looked too controlled. Meanwhile, Evelyn was taken to the station for questioning. It wasn't because they suspected her. It was standard procedure. Still, the sterile walls and cold metal chair made her feel like she'd done something wrong. The detective across from her asked the same questions again and again when she last saw Dylan. Whether he had any enemies, if she'd noticed anything strange lately. Evelyn could barely answer. Her hands shook as she tried to remember every detail from the night before. She told them Dylan had gone to bed around midnight. He'd been quiet that evening, withdrawn, but that wasn't unusual for him lately. Teenagers go through phases, she'd told herself. He'd been stressed about school, about friends. She'd even heard him arguing on the phone a few days ago, but didn't know who it was with. She regretted not asking. As detectives continued their search, more details began to surface. Dylan's phone was nowhere to be found. His laptop was missing too. The drawers in his desk had been opened and rummaged through, but the rest of the house remained untouched. It looked like whoever had done this had gone straight for Dylan's room, like they knew exactly what they were looking for. Later that afternoon, Detective Cole found something on Dylan's desk that caught his attention. It was a crumpled sheet of notebook paper covered in scribbles. Most of the names were crossed out, except for one, circled twice in thick black marker, C. Martin. The name meant nothing to Evelyn when they showed it to her. She shook her head, insisting she'd never heard Dylan mention anyone by that name. But the detective's instincts told him this was important. He asked Evelyn for access to Dylan's school contacts, social media accounts, and anything else that might help. While the investigation moved forward, the small town of Maplewood buzzed with rumors. Some said Dylan had been involved with the wrong crowd. Others whispered about a secret relationship or bullying. In a community where everyone thought they knew each other, no one could believe that something so violent had happened just down the street that night. The coroner's preliminary report came in. Dylan's cause of death was strangulation by a thin cord or rope, possibly from behind. There were no defensive wounds, no bruises on his hands, no signs of struggle. It suggested that Dylan had known his killer. Maybe he'd trusted them. Maybe he didn't even see it coming. Evelyn couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his face, the way he looked that morning, the broken picture frame beside him. The police had told her not to stay in the house, but she couldn't leave. It still smelled like him. His jacket still hung on the back of the chair. His shoes still sat by the door. Have you ever lost someone suddenly, without warning? The kind of loss that makes every sound, every corner of your home feel haunted. If you have, you understand what Evelyn was going through. Drop a comment below if you think grief can cloud judgment, because soon, Evelyn's emotions would lead her to make a choice she could never undo. Detective Cole returned the next morning with updates. The tech team had traced the serial number of Dylan's missing laptop. It hadn't been pawned or sold. Instead, they discovered it had been connected to a Wi-Fi network just one street over from the Harper home hours before Dylan's death. That raised an unsettling question. Was the killer someone from the neighborhood? The team began interviewing Dylan's friends and classmates. One name kept coming up: Caleb Martin. He and Dylan had once been close, but they'd recently stopped talking. Some students said they'd had a falling out, though no one knew why. When Detective Cole checked school records, Caleb's full name matched the one from Dylan's list, C. Martin. Suddenly, the investigation had its first real lead. Before we dive into what detectives found next, hit that like button if you're following this case closely. Because what started as a tragic mystery inside a quiet family home was about to twist into something no one saw coming. 2 days after Dylan Harper's death, detectives found his missing phone. It was wedged deep inside a storm drain at the edge of a park only a few blocks from the Harper home. The discovery reignited the investigation. Someone had tried to get rid of it, someone who knew it contained answers. The phone was water damaged, but forensic technicians worked through the night to recover the data. When they finally unlocked it, what they uncovered changed the entire direction of the case. The phone revealed a string of messages that painted a disturbing picture of Dylan's final days. He had been receiving threatening texts from an unknown number. The messages started as teasing, but over time they grew more aggressive. The sender accused Dylan of doing something terrible, demanding money to keep it quiet. At first, Dylan ignored the messages. Then the threats turned personal references to his school, his friends, even the layout of his bedroom. Whoever was behind it knew him well. The last message came at 12:46 a.m., the night of his death. It read, "You have 1 hour, or everyone finds out." After that, the phone went silent. No more texts, no calls. Investigators traced the number and found it connected to an anonymous online account under the name CM_truth. That username, combined with the C. Martin written on the paper in Dylan's room, made the police confident they'd found their next target. Detectives brought in Caleb Martin for questioning. He was 17, quiet, and visibly nervous when officers arrived at his house. His parents seemed shocked by the accusation, insisting Caleb and Dylan had been friends for years. At the station, Caleb admitted that he and Dylan had fought recently, but claimed he had nothing to do with his death. He said Dylan had been the one blackmailing him. According to Caleb, a few weeks earlier, someone had hacked into his private messages and found embarrassing photos. Then, Caleb said, Dylan threatened to share them unless Caleb paid him. CM_truth, he claimed, was Dylan's own fake account. Caleb swore he had no reason to harm him. Still, detectives didn't take his story at face value. They checked his alibi. Security footage from a gas station 3 miles away showed Caleb buying snacks at 12:58 a.m. roughly, the same time the final message had been sent to Dylan's phone. He was there with 2 friends, both of whom confirmed his timeline. That ruled him out as being physically present at the Harper home when Dylan died. But it didn't rule out his involvement entirely. Had Caleb hired someone? Had the threats escalated to something worse? Detective Ryan Cole wasn't satisfied. He believed there was another layer to the story, something no one had said yet. When the forensic team examined Dylan's recovered phone more closely, they found a deleted folder of encrypted files. Once decrypted, the contents revealed dozens of screenshots, messages, photos, and even videos Dylan had collected as part of a blackmail scheme. The victims weren't random classmates. They were people he knew personally. Dylan had been running multiple fake accounts, targeting peers for money and attention. It was a double life his mother never knew about. When Evelyn learned the truth, she was devastated. The image she had of her son, the kind, smart, well-behaved boy she raised, was replaced by something she couldn't recognize. But grief and shame often twist together in strange ways. Instead of anger, she felt confusion and guilt. Had she failed him somehow? Did he do this because she hadn't noticed his struggles? While the police turned their attention toward tracing Dylan's victims, Evelyn began going through his belongings herself. She told detectives she wanted to help, but deep down, she needed answers of her own. That's when she found something they hadn't. Hidden inside Dylan's desk drawer was a flash drive wrapped in tissue. When she plugged it into her computer, the screen filled with folders labeled by names of students from Dylan's school. Each folder contained screenshots, messages, and files similar to the ones found on his phone. Evelyn stared at the screen, trembling. One of the folders was labeled Martin. Inside were photos of Caleb, clearly taken from his social media and personal messages. There were also documents showing bank transfers, proof Dylan had extorted him. It became painfully clear. Her son had been the blackmailer all along. She didn't tell the detectives what she'd found. Instead, she closed the laptop and sat in silence for nearly an hour, trying to process what it meant. The world saw her as a grieving mother, but now she carried a truth too heavy to share. Dylan wasn't an innocent victim, but he also didn't deserve to die. Detective Cole continued digging. He started to wonder if Dylan's death might have been connected to his secret activities. Perhaps one of his victims found out and retaliated, but the evidence didn't lead anywhere new. Every suspect had an alibi. Every timeline matched. There were no fingerprints in Dylan's room except for his own, his sister's, and his mother's. That last detail nagged at the detective. Though he didn't say it aloud, Evelyn began to unravel quietly. She stopped eating, barely slept, and avoided everyone. Her daughter, Lily, didn't understand why her mother barely looked at her anymore. Evelyn spent most nights sitting on the floor of Dylan's room, staring at the stain on the carpet that would never wash out. She told herself she was searching for peace, but the truth was, something darker was stirring inside her, an unbearable guilt that would soon bring everything crashing down. If you've been following this story, what do you think really happened that night? Was it revenge, panic, or something else entirely? Comment your theory below, because the real answer would shock even the investigators who thought they'd seen it all. The news that Evelyn Harper was now a suspect spread through the town like wildfire. Neighbors who had once brought her casseroles and flowers now whispered from across the street. Reporters camped outside the courthouse, eager for any detail about how a loving mother could be accused of killing her own son. For days, Evelyn refused to speak. She sat in the grey interrogation room, pale and hollow-eyed, while detectives laid out the evidence piece by piece. It had started small. Her fingerprints on the picture frame weren't surprising. She lived in that house. But when forensic tests matched her prints to the cord used in the strangulation, the tone of the investigation shifted completely. Detective Ryan Cole couldn't ignore the evidence anymore. Every trace pointed back to her. The fibers from the cord matched a phone charger from her own nightstand. No sign of forced entry, no intruder DNA, no mystery footprints. The killer hadn't come from outside. The killer had been home all along. Evelyn's lawyer tried to argue that the evidence was circumstantial. She could have touched the cord days before, but the timeline was tight, and her behavior after Dylan's death only deepened suspicion. She'd tampered with his laptop before police could retrieve it. She'd deleted files from his accounts, and when detectives recovered her internet search history, they found queries from the night before Dylan's death. How to erase phone data permanently, and what happens when police track messages. The truth began to take shape, though no one wanted to believe it. Evelyn had discovered Dylan's secret the night before he died. While cleaning his room, she had stumbled upon the flash drive he used to store incriminating files. Shocked, she opened it and saw the messages, the threats, the money transfers. Her son, the boy she'd raised alone after his father left, had been extorting other teenagers. For Evelyn, it was like her entire world had cracked in half. According to the timeline investigators later reconstructed, Evelyn confronted Dylan shortly after midnight. The confrontation was heated. She demanded to know why he'd done it, why he'd become someone so cruel. He shouted back, telling her she didn't understand, that he needed the money. He accused her of never being there for him, of caring more about her image than her family. Words became screams. In a surge of rage and despair, Evelyn grabbed his phone charger from the desk and wrapped it around his neck. By the time she realized what she'd done, it was already too late. She panicked. For several minutes, she sat beside him on the floor, sobbing and whispering his name. Then something inside her shifted. Survival instinct took over. She decided she couldn't let anyone know what had really happened. She staged the scene, breaking the picture frame, opening the window, throwing the phone into the storm drain. She even left fingerprints deliberately on the window latch, hoping it would look like someone else had been there. Then she waited. At dawn, she made the call, pretending she had just woken up to the horror. Detective Cole later said it was the calmness that gave her away. Most parents in her position would have been hysterical, disoriented. Evelyn had been shaken, yes, but too controlled. Her answers were rehearsed, her emotions uneven. When police presented her with the evidence, she didn't scream or deny it. She just sat there, staring at her hands, whispering, he wasn't supposed to die. The trial drew huge attention. The courtroom was packed with journalists, classmates, and neighbors who couldn't reconcile the woman they knew with the crime she had committed. The prosecution painted Evelyn as a woman who snapped under the weight of shame and anger. The defense argued it was a tragic accident, an impulsive moment fueled by heartbreak. But the physical evidence, the marks, the timing, the cover-up was too strong to ignore. When the verdict was read, Evelyn didn't cry. The judge sentenced her to 25 years in prison for second-degree murder. She stood silently, her expression blank, her eyes unfocused. Her daughter Lily, now living with a foster family, wasn't in the courtroom. Evelyn had asked to see her one last time, but Lily had refused. The girl was too young to understand everything, but old enough to know she could never go back to that house again. After the sentencing, Detective Cole filed his final report. It noted how grief had turned into guilt, guilt into rage, and rage into something irreversible. He wrote that the case would stay with him for the rest of his life, not because of the crime itself, but because of how normal everything seemed before it happened. The Harper home had looked like any other, but inside it had been cracking for years. Evelyn spent her days in prison quietly, rarely speaking to anyone. She joined the library detail and read constantly, trying to disappear into other people's stories. Every night, she wrote letters to Lily that she never sent. In them, she tried to explain what had happened, but no words ever felt right. Back in Maplewood, the house where everything had happened was eventually sold. The new family repainted the walls, replaced the carpet, and tried to forget the stories attached to it. But the neighbors never really did. They said sometimes, on quiet mornings, they could still hear faint echoes from that day, the scream that had broken the silence. If you stayed with this story until now, you know that evil doesn't always wear a stranger's face. Sometimes it hides behind love, behind family, behind the illusion of safety. If this case shocked you, hit the like button and share your thoughts below. And remember, not every crime begins with hatred. Sometimes it begins with heartbreak.